Hello Nintendo Wii here, and welcome back to Let's Play Retro Games, and welcome to part 1 of my Game Boy collection. In this part I'm going to be talking you through half of the games in this cabinet, and in part 2 I'm going to be covering the second half. So please enjoy. The first thing we have here is the Game Boy camera. A really fun accessory to the original Game Boy that actually turned it into a really basic but fun digital camera. It also includes loads of little mini games, and I did really enjoy playing with it back in the day. And I actually used to have something that let me connect it to Windows 95 to actually store the pictures on the computer, which is really interesting. I'll see if I can find what it's called, because I bet not a lot of people know about that. And if you want to see what the actual camera looks like, there it is. I'll put some video over there of me actually using it, but suffice to say the quality isn't great, but it is a really neat idea, and the little head spins round, so this was actually one of the very first things that actually let you take a selfie. So I guess it's kind of cool from a historical point of view. And it did come in loads of different colours as well, which is really neat. The next game up here that we have in a box is Wario Land 2. One of my favourite games in the Wario Land series. If you didn't see it, I actually did a WarioWare video the other day, so I'll link to that down below. And I'm definitely planning on doing a video on the Wario Land series as well. They're really fun games. They're a spin-off of the Mario Land series, which I'll get to in a minute. The next Game Boy game that we had up there, this one is called The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls. And this is a really interesting game. It's actually made by the same team that went on to make Zelda Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. This uses the same engine and the same sort of sprite style and stuff. I haven't played it too much, but there is a translation patch out there, and from what I've played and from what I've heard, it's a really good game. So I'm definitely planning to go back and play some more of it in the future. And just for a comparison, here's the size difference between the Japanese boxes and the boxes that we got in the UK and the US. So they're a little bit thinner, and they're quite a lot shorter as well. And they look really nice. I mean, I love the artwork on a lot of the Game Boy boxes. Really cool. And the Japanese ones are always a lot cheaper to pick up as well, it seems. So if you're into Game Boy collecting and you're not too worried about a language barrier, maybe the Japanese Game Boy games are more for you. And talking about Japanese Game Boy games, there's another two here. This one is Mario's Picross. If you don't know what the Picross games are, they're really fun puzzle games where you basically have to chip away at little tiles to uncover a hidden pixel art picture in the middle. So you can see on the back there, the example is that you make a Starman from Mario. So it's really cool. Not all the levels in it are based on Mario though, which was a little bit disappointing, but never mind. And the next game here, and my favourite game on the original Game Boy, this is Super Mario Land. Really nice little box here. This one, for some reason, is actually a bit smaller than a regular Japanese Game Boy game. I'm not sure why. I mean, it still has a manual inside and stuff, but it's just a little bit smaller. Don't know why, but still really cool to have. What else have we got here? Here's two more Game Boy games. This is Super RC Pro-Am and Bubble Bobble Part 2. Super RC Pro-Am was one of the very first games that Rare ever made, and it actually plays really well. It got really good reviews back in the day from the Nintendo Power magazine and the Game Boy magazines back then. I think it's called Total GB, something like that, was the Game Boy magazine. It's quite fun. Obviously it's very basic for today's standards. And Bubble Bobble Part 2. I love all the games in the Bubble Bobble series, and this one is my favourite out of all of them. I remember actually playing this game every day after school for years on end. Actually, if I get this down here. So as I was saying, I used to play that game every day after school, and I would actually, believe it or not, take this really big case here, which actually let you store your Game Boy and loads of games, and I would take that to my nan's house after school, and I'd sit down and flip through all the games. Can you imagine me walking up the street with this after school? I must have looked like a right dork, but it's really cool to have, and yeah, it's just a little bit of history. So one of my favourite games ever, Bubble Bobble Part 2. And a game that's not so great, but it's still kind of interesting. It's a little oddity. It's a basic puzzle game called Mario and Yoshi. I think it was also released just under the name Yoshi, maybe on the SNES. It's really nothing to write home about. It's a very basic puzzle game, but the Game Boy is full of puzzle games, which you'll see in a minute, so it's not the worst out there. And the last thing to show from up there that's related to the original Game Boy is this here. This is the Super Game Boy 2. If you don't know what this is, it plugs into the top of a SNES, and lets you play Game Boy games through the TV. The Super Game Boy 2 was only ever released in Japan, and it has a little extra bit on the side so you can plug in a link cable so you can play in multiplayer. And of course I have the original Super Game Boy there as well, so there's a difference. Literally the only difference with the actual cart is the fact that it's got the little adapter bit in the corner. This, for years, was my preferred way of playing Game Boy games, when I was at home at least. It really does make the games look really cool, and actually a lot of the games have secret borders or special options that only appear when you play it on the Super Game Boy. Like, I remember playing a lot of Pokemon Red and Blue on this, and you get the border with the little Pokemon pictures in, which I always thought was really cool. I love the fact on this as well that you can set your own colour palettes for the game, and you can actually doodle on the borders as well, which was a lot of fun back in the day. And the Super Game Boy 2 has a different set of borders to the original Game Boy, so it is kind of cool having both of them just to compare the difference. So now for some of the systems. Here's the original Game Boy, and here is one that I, for some reason, thought would be a great idea to paint all over it. So it was my very bad attempt at making a custom Game Boy with a little Donkey Kong barrel in the middle. But the original Game Boy, it's kind of heavy, it's not my favourite out of the Game Boy line, and the screen itself is not great. And here's my favourite way of playing Game Boy games. This is the Game Boy Pocket. So this one was actually drawn by my girlfriend. She put Lugia on there, which is really nice. A lot better than my attempt, I have to say. There's a see-through Game Boy Pocket as well, and here's a nice blue one. And the great thing about this blue one is the fact that it's actually got a backlight inside it as well, which really looks cool when you're playing the games in the dark. The screen on the Game Boy Pocket is a lot better than the screen on the original Game Boy. If you are looking to get into Game Boy collecting, I would definitely recommend the Game Boy Pocket over the original Game Boy, because not only is it a lot smaller and lighter, it also takes less batteries, and the screen is a lot better overall anyway. Even if it's not backlit, it's actually better because it has less ghosting. I'll save the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance systems for the other episodes. So now, let's take a look at the games inside the display cabinet. So I'm just going to go through the shelves now and show you my original Game Boy games that are in the cabinet. So the first ones in the corner are Super Mario Land and Super Mario Land the Japanese one, and next to that is Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins. These are some of my favourite games on the original Game Boy. They're so much fun to play. The second one is technically better, but I actually prefer the first one just because it's a lot faster to play and I really enjoy the gameplay of it. And next to that we have Wario Land, which was sort of a spin-off of Mario Land 2. The original one actually says Mario Land 3, if you can see that there, Super Mario Land 3, and then they sort of went on to become their own series. So the next one there, Wario Land 2, doesn't have the Mario Land subtitle, but it's still part of the same series. And then there's Wario Blast, which is basically Bomberman, but a Wario version of it, and then a few Tetris games at the end there. So the original Tetris, which I'm sure everyone has played, it was a pack-in game for the system and incredibly popular, and for good reason. And Tetris 2, which isn't really a worthy sequel in my opinion. And then we have Tetris Blast, which is a bit different. I can't really remember what the difference is between Tetris 2 and Tetris Blast. And then at the end there, probably my favourite version of Tetris on the original Game Boy is Tetris Plus, which has a really fun puzzle mode, which is kind of underappreciated in my opinion. And then on the next line down here we have Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, which is a sequel to the NES game called Kid Icarus. It's a really fun game. I actually streamed a bit of this, so if you have a look in the description, I'll put the link to that. And then we have Golf, which is a very basic golf game. It plays a lot like the NES one. It is kind of fun, but I do wish it sort of showed you where the ball would end up, because you sort of just have to guess. And then next to them is my Mega Man collection. I don't have Mega Man 5 because it is very expensive, but I have 1, 2, 3 and 4. They're all sort of based on the NES games, but they all sort of have their own versions of the stages. They take some of the bosses from one of the NES games and half the bosses from the second NES game. So, for example, Mega Man 3 has half the bosses from Mega Man 3 and half the bosses from Mega Man 4. And Mega Man 5 there is actually entirely its own game, and it has a completely unique set of bosses which are only in the Game Boy game. So I would actually say that Rockman World 5 in this case is the best out of all these ones, but I'd highly recommend all of them. They all play really well. I did a Let's Play of Mega Man 3 on my channel a long time ago, so I'll put a link in the description for that. And next to them we have Parasol Stars, which I think is part of the Rainbow Island series. Yep, Rainbow Island 2, which itself is part of the Bubble Bobble series, which I talked about at the start of the video. So I really recommend all these games. They're really fun arcade style games. Next to that is James Bond 007. I actually did a video about this. If you have a look at our James Bond 007 Retro and Modern game, I did that with the Beard Gaming. And the game next to it, Terminator 2, was another game that I actually showed off in one of the Retro and Modern games. So I'll link to both of those in the description as well. And next to that is RoboCop, which I can't really say a lot good about, but it does have some really good music, so that's one thing going for it at least. And then on the next row down here, there's Mario and Yoshi, which I talked about earlier. And next to that is a really cool vertical scrolling shooter called Solar Striker. I really enjoy that one. I'll probably end up doing a Let's Play of it in the future actually. It's really good. And it's very cheap as well, so if you're looking for a shooter for the Game Boy, Solar Striker should be really high on your list. And next to that is Dr. Mario. Really iconic puzzle game. I'm sure everyone knows what Dr. Mario is. It's kind of basic, it's just Nintendo's take on Tetris, I suppose. And then the next one here is Killer Instinct, made by Rare. And as you can see on this one and a few of the other games, it actually says, if I can zoom in a bit there, Super Game Boy Game Pack, which means that when you plug it into the Super Game Boy on the SNES, it either has enhanced colour palette or it has its own border, that sort of thing. So it's a really good conversion of the SNES game. Obviously it doesn't play quite as well, but it's very impressive what they managed to get out of it. And the game next to that is Shadow Warriors. I did a Let's Play of Shadow Warriors at the start of the year and I think it's really good. So if you want a sort of action platformer for the Game Boy, Shadow Warriors is the one to get. Next to that is a really interesting game called Mole Mania. A lot of people don't know about this, but it was actually made by Shigeru Miyamoto, the same guy who made Mario and Zelda, so really kind of underrated, sort of hidden gem for the Game Boy that hopefully is getting more popular now, and as you can see there, it's also Super Game Boy compatible. And next to that is Balloon Kid, which is an amazing sequel to the NES game Balloon Fight. This one actually has a full single player adventure mode to go with it, which is really fun, and I was very impressed by that one. Next to that is Street Racer, a game that was released on many different systems. The Game Boy version is obviously very much reduced in quality compared to the Sega Saturn or the SNES version, so I wouldn't expect too much from that, but it's nice to see a sort of into-the-screen racer on the Game Boy. And there we have Gargoyle's Quest, which is a really good game, part of the Ghouls and Ghosts, Ghosts and Goblins series. This one's part RPG and part action platformer, and it's incredibly difficult, but it's very rewarding, and I would love to get the sequel on the SNES at some point as well. And next to that we have RC Pro-Am, which I talked about earlier, by Rare, and then at the end here we have a game called Puzznic, which is kind of difficult puzzle game that I really can't get very far in, but it's quite fun all the same. And then if we go down to the next row, this game's called Castellian or Castellian. This one's a really interesting game. I love what they did with the graphics in it. I think it's very impressive what they managed to do with the original Game Boy, and it holds up quite favourably to the NES version as well. And the next three games here, I'll talk about all these three together. These are the Saga games, also known outside of Japan as Final Fantasy Adventure. As Final Fantasy Legend, sorry, not Final Fantasy Adventure. I haven't played any of the actual English ones, so I just picked these up just to have in the collection really, and I'd love to get the Final Fantasy Legend games in the future. Then we have another puzzle game with Yoshi on it. This one's called Yoshi's Cookie, and this one was also on the NES and the SNES as well. It's quite fun. It's by no means my favourite puzzle game, but it's okay I suppose. And I'll just go over this one because it's here, but I'm not really talking about Game Boy Color games in this episode. That's Kirby's Tilt and Tumble. And you can see the little extra chip there. That means that it actually has motion sensing capabilities as well, which is really cool, but I'll come to that one in a future video. And then we have a few more Kirby games, that's why this one was here. So Kirby's Block Ball is basically Breakout with Kirby. Fairly fun, but nothing too exciting. And there we have Kirby's Pinball Land, which a lot like Block Ball is just a basic pinball game. But it has great music and the gameplay is really good, the ball physics are quite good, which is the main thing you need to worry about from a pinball game. And then we have Kirby's Star Stacker, which is a fairly basic puzzle game, but it is quite fun once again. And there's Kirby's Dream Land, and if you notice on the cover there, Kirby's actually white, because they didn't know what colour Kirby was going to be when they made the cover. obviously because it's on the black and white Game Boy. This is actually the first ever Kirby game, and it's really fun, but you can't actually swallow the enemies and turn into them like you can in the later ones. And the one on the end there, I haven't got the English version of it, so that's the Japanese version, that's Kirby's Dream Land 2, which is a huge improvement over the original. There's so many more levels, and you can actually swallow the enemies and turn into them, as well as use the animal buddies which come back in Dreamland 3. So that's it for part 1. I really hope you enjoyed what you've seen so far. Stay tuned for part 2 when I'll be covering the second half of the games in the display cabinet. And then, sometime next week, part 3 is going to go up where I'm covering the Game Boy Color games. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please check out my Patreon, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye!